So I have this dark brown wool. I got this from Tea Tartans on Etsy. I am going to iron this first. I typically iron my fabrics instead of just pre-washing them to deal with shrinkage for two reasons. One, I wash my clothes in cold water and air dry them anyways. And two, I live 10 miles away from a massive wildfire here in Oregon, so I can't really air dry it. This is going to take me a year and a half to get through, since it is a 60 by 120 inch strip of fabric, and I have this tiny little tabletop ironing board. I will eventually get myself a regular sized ironing board. However, this is what I have, so I am just going to deal with it. Now, I will say one nice thing about having a incredibly tiny ironing board is it is very portable, so I'm just going to be watching some TV while I iron all of this fabric. Might as well get it out of the way now instead of just doing it a little bit at a time. Save myself the trouble in the future. So here's where we're at. I've got all of the pieces together. However, I have realized why I had pinned them together in the first place instead of just taping them. And that's because I did not have any sort of proper pattern paper, wrapping paper, really anything of the sort when I first made this, so I just used parchment paper. And parchment paper does not like to stick at all to tape. So if I'm not careful, it just very easily comes apart like this. So I think I'm going to end up redoing this pattern on my tracing paper that I have recently gotten and have been using for patterns. I've taped that before, and I know that tape does like to stick to it. So I'll be redoing this pattern, probably with much more clear instructions on the actual pattern itself, since I had gotten very confused about which side was which. Alright, so this is where I'm at so far. I've got my 3 panels retraced out. It's not super pretty, but it does get the job done. Going to move on to the 4th panel. That one I'm going to have to alter a little bit because I drafted it wrong, but it seems like it will hopefully be an easy enough fix. But first thing is first, I'm going to cut out all of these pieces and just get them out of the way so that way I can do the final one. Alright, so I'm going to be doing the back panel now. What happened last time with my first version of this was the back ended up extremely short compared to the front, and I measured it out, and this section right here is about 5 inches shorter than it's supposed to be, and this is about a half an inch shorter. Looking back at the original instructions, I realized that I had drafted it incorrectly. So what I'm going to do is just extend this down so they're all the same length. All of my pieces are, from the waistband to the edge. So that way it's not as much of a pain as it was before to do the hem. So I'll be doing that. Hopefully that works, but we'll see. Here we are with another not great, but it does get the job done and it's better than before, so I will accept that. So as I was preparing to put my pattern pieces on the wool and start tracing, adding the seam allowance and cutting it out, I remembered I also need to make little facing patterns, so I'm going to do that first. I'll also need to iron my lining, which is just going to be a muslin because that is all that I have for a lining, so it might show, but it'll be white, so you can pretend it's a petticoat, I guess. I don't really care that much. I just want to put a little bit of facing in there, and I don't want to use up my nice wool for that. Okay, so I have a little bit of a conundrum here. I was anticipating using this strip of fabric for at least 2 skirts. However, this has this white line right down the middle of it. I knew that when I bought it. That's probably why it was much cheaper than most wool tends to be. However, because of the massive amount of space that this uses, this back panel, it takes up almost an entire half of this fabric. So what I think I'm going to do is shorten it by about 5 inches or so, see what happens there. At least that way I'm just not using as much fabric as I would be. It'll still end around mid-calf-ish for me, just a little lower calf, mid-calf-ish. So it won't be too short or anything like that. It'll still look cute, but it won't be the floor length that it's really intended to be. And the Keystone guide actually has you draft this at 40 inches. And I am under 5 foot tall, so I immediately took 5 inches off when drafting the pattern in the first place. So taking another 5 inches off probably won't be that bad. As I said, it'll end right around here-ish instead of down by my ankles. And I'm okay with that. So I'm going to shorten this up. I'll just fold it over and see how I feel, if I can fit it on here. And if it'll definitely take up a lot less fabric, especially with this massive back panel. Okay, so cutting 5 inches off, I ended up cutting it instead of just folding it. just because it was a little bit easier since all of these are on curves and the paper didn't really want to fold that way nicely. So this right here might make some people gasp, but it's what I'm doing because it just takes up so much less fabric. What I'm going to do is omit the seam allowance on the top and the bottom. I'm not too worried about losing that inch, just because, as I said, I am quite short, so it's not going to be that huge of a difference. I will include the seam allowance on the sides though, just to make everything easy and to make sure it will fit my waist. It seems to be fitting just fine now, very tightly, but I was able to fit it all into this first half, so I can save all the rest of the fabric for other projects, which is why I had bought so much in the first place. I want to make other skirts, maybe a jacket. I haven't really decided yet, but I wanted to only use half of it for this skirt, so I'm glad I was able to make that work. Point where I started basting them together, my lining and outer fabric, so I can flatline them. That took hours though, so I just gave up and pinned it. Before I stitched them all together, I thought it would be a good idea just to double check that I did it all correctly, and I am glad that I did, because that piece I did incorrectly and would have had two second panels that were the exact same instead of mirrored. So I am going to just flip that one around and stitch them all together so that way all of my pieces are flatlined and I can actually get started on the actual construction on it. So far today, it only took a literal eternity, is I flatlined all of my pieces and then I just stitched these two back pieces together, leaving room for the placket. So I'm going to iron and fill these down here. Have lost a game of thread chicken. I only have about an inch left and I ran out of thread. I could, if I really wanted to, make it go that far, but I would lose my mind after every stitch having to re-thread it because there's not enough of a tail to keep the thread in my needle. So I'm just going to re-thread a new piece and finish up this last inch. So this is where I'm at so far. I didn't really film much these last couple of days. I've just been attaching and felling down all of these seams. I did all of those by hand, so that was just a lot of me watching TV while I was just felling seams. I made a couple mistakes already. I don't think they'll be too detrimental. if not somewhat fixable. So right off of the bat, this back seam was the very first seam that I did, and I did not realize until I was done doing the second half of this next panel that I put these two panels on backwards. These two longer ends are supposed to go together instead of these two shorter ends. Now I will be gathering this top up to about 3 inches or so, and I played around with it and it seems like that will kind of even everything out anyways. It'll pull these sides up and this kind of down when I gather it and attach the waistband. Either way, I'm going to make it work because I am not going to undo all of this. Also, somehow with my inability to measure and count correctly, my second panels ended up being about 1 inch longer. And I think the trouble came doing this third panel here. So this seam measures at 30 inches. This longer seam on the second panel is 30 inches. All of my seams should be at 30 inches. But for some reason, my end of the third panel is 29 inches. I don't know how that happened. I don't know why I did that. But I also had a similar issue with the first time I did it. At first I thought it might have just been due to the bias and it stretching out, but it might have also just been me not being able to measure correctly. Again, I think that'll be something that I can fix when I attach the facing and it gets folded up into itself. Hopefully, if not, I can just kind of trim that down. Thankfully, I didn't have to do a whole lot of felling on that inch since it's just on the edge. But yes, if anything, it can be trimmed down to fit. I've also added a placket as well as a pocket, and I made this pocket bigger since my last one. It was fine depth-wise, it was just a little narrow for my hand. So looking back on my footage from when I lined everything up to make sure I had put the linings on the right side of the fabric to make sure it worked out, all of these edges did line up perfectly. So I'm not too sure what exactly happened there. I think my running theme for making this skirt is I'm doing everything backwards. I think I might have switched these back panels or the second ones to go on the right side instead of the left or vice versa. I'm not entirely sure. As I said, it seems to be the running theme of this project so far is just doing everything backwards. So if anyone has any ideas, please let me know. I'm thinking that might have been it. I am not going to undo all of these seams and redo them. I just spent 2 days felling seams and ironing and sewing. So I'm pretty over that right now, so I'll just deal with it. So, this always happens, almost every single time it seems like, that I make a waistband where it is just ever so slightly too short. However, the thing that is most irritating about this is this was the first thing that I sewed when sewing on this waistband, so I started off wrong. I have hand stitched all of this waistband. Down here at the end, we have a little extra. I'm probably just going to live with it since I already accidentally put a little pleat into this placket here. So I don't think just squishing this bit right in there will be that noticeable with this second accidental pleat. This always seems to happen. So now I'm at the point where I'm going to start piecing together all of the facing before I attach it to the hem. And while I'll be doing the bottom with the machine, I'm going to be doing the entire top by hand. And I have realized it's gonna take forever. I didn't film anything past that point, but what I did was I took some quarters and I took some quarters and covered them in fabric, and then I just attached them so they are just fake buttons, but they look really cute. I also added some hook and eye closures here, which of course Cinder won't let you see. I do need to add a couple of extra ones in there. Okay. And this is why all of my clothes are covered in dog hair. So, here's some of the hooks and eyes. I need to add some extra ones here since there is a little bit of gaping. Put the eyes down in here. I also am not the greatest at measuring waistbands that actually fit, so I needed to add an extra eye here so that way it can actually fit a little bit more snugly around my waist.